Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Aiden, thanks so much for having me.
There's a lot that we're going to dive into today. I know you've obviously worked at a bunch of different companies. You've been at G2, Salesforce, HubSpot, Microsoft. I feel like I listed out all the tech brand names. But one of the things, and obviously today you're CMO at Whereby, and we're going to talk a lot about that because you're in the meeting space. We care a lot about meetings. So we're going to talk a bit more about that. But one of the things I wanted to start off with was you actually knew since you were 10 years old that you wanted to be a CMO. Uh, like, how did that happen? How does a 10-year-old even know what a CMO is?
Yeah, it's really weird. I get asked about this a lot, and I still don't fully know where it came from. No one in my family or close family or like even family friends was in marketing or advertising, so I don't know where it came from, but my hunch is that it had something to do with just like advertising and seeing ads and just being drawn to them as a kid, I think. Yeah, like I really fell in love with the whole like Mad Men era of marketing and advertising, in terms of just like the pitching and the creativity. And yeah, it was weird. It wasn't just like knowing that I wanted to be a CMO at 10ish. It was like knowing that I wanted to be a CMO by the age of 30. It was like so oddly specific. I am like a really weird person at manifestation, and I've only learned that word recently. I didn't know it was a thing, but it turns out like I am someone that does like manifestation and just didn't know it was a thing. I always thought of it as just dreaming big, and yeah, it turns out that like I vividly remember at the age of 10, my mom told me this recently, that on my wall in my bedroom I had a sign that said like I will be a millionaire by, I remember the year, but it was like I'll be a CMO by 30, and it had like five things on it. And really, I think most of them have happened now. One of them was I was going to climb Everest, though I don't know how realistic that is, nor if I want to do that these days. But yeah, I'm a weird person in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really great start because I think it's going to set the stage for a bunch of other questions we're going to ask. And so, one of the things then, that we always ask our guests is, have you had a favorite or most memorable manager in your career? And I guess like as a second part to that question, I'm gonna say like, have did they help you become a CMO and like go on that path?
Yeah, so I definitely do have a few memorable ones, really. I mean, one of the most memorable, probably, and most maybe important bosses and CMOs for me was Kip Bodnar, so CMO at HubSpot. And I think with Kip was just, I mean, he's just the loveliest human in the world and incredibly knowledgeable about so many things, whether it's wine or art or Japanese knife making. Like, just he just like obsesses over the details. And I think I was able to watch how he led teams, and I learned a lot from him. And I even like really vividly remember actually this one time I was so grateful to have him as a manager, and I sent him an email about something. I can't remember what it was. I think it might have been a campaign I was pitching, or maybe like I was giving constructive feedback on something. I can't remember like the content of my email, but I just so vividly, it's literally etched into my memory, his reply. And it basically like, hey Ryan, thank you for your email. I would have appreciated it. I would have loved it if you had asked me the question this way. And he literally like reworded my email in like a more constructive way. And then proceeded to answer that question. And it was like the first time, I think so many managers kind of manage by telling, and he really managed by telling and then showing slash doing like what he wanted me to do. And it was something that's just stuck with me ever since then. And so if I see if someone on my team writes an email to me, to an all hands email, or to a company, or to our database, or if they do something anyways, I try to be really specific in my feedback and then help them see how I would have gone about doing it differently. And so he yeah, he just always challenged me, and I felt like I grew a lot from him. And then yeah, my CMO at Exact Target, so going back a long time now, maybe almost a decade, I think I just learned a lot from him in terms of dreaming big and being incredibly creative and just not doing the status quo. Like I feel like the term in marketing is so overused that I cannot stand is like best practice. And like if it's a best practice, that means it's like a boring practice and everyone does it. And if everyone does it, it's not going to cut through with an audience. And so not to say you shouldn't do those things, but that's just not going to be enough. So yeah, they're probably two. Tim Coppett at Exact Target and Kip Bodnar at HubSpot. And I have had a really horrible manager too that I won't say the name of or the company of, but um, where I think they really went wrong was they would give really, really harsh feedback, but never kind of like help you. They would just kind of criticize and then not help you understand how to solve the problem or how to do the thing better. And that was very early on in my career, and it was really hard to learn and grow. And so I try really hard every day to not be that kind of a manager that just kind of cracks the whip, but then doesn't give context or help.
Yeah, I think that sets the stage really well. And so it sounds like you started to lead a team pretty early on in your career. So you must have had some mistakes along the way. So
So
what
many.
was something that I guess you started out doing that you later on stopped doing?
I mean, gosh, there was so many things. I feel like I could like write a book about this. I've made so many mistakes along the way. I think really early on, what I struggled with was I think I first started managing people maybe when I was about 23 or something like that, which with like no management experience. And then within like a few years, maybe by like 23 or sorry, by 24 or 25, I think I was managing about 20 people. And again, zero experience, just like on the job learning. And my manager was actually overseas in the US because I've always worked for US HQ companies. And so not only was I a first time manager, but I also wasn't being managed closely by them because they were remotely and they were an amazing manager, but I wasn't able to kind of see how they worked day to day because they connected once a week. And in terms of like big mistakes, I think there was a few. I mean, I think, one of them for me was definitely being really scattered, my team, and being focused and sharing every single idea that I have. And I'm a really creative person, and so I have lots of ideas. And I think early on, I learned that quite quickly that sharing every idea you have doesn't really help your team. It just kind of pulls them in a lot of different directions. And so I have a bit of a thing now. It's not like a hard and fast rule necessarily, but if I have a bit of a crazy idea or something, I'll just sleep on it. And then if the next day I still think it's a crazy great idea, then I will like package it up and share it with the right person versus just kind of like stream of consciousness. So that's probably one big one. And another big lesson that I learned was feedback that I've gotten from a lot of teams and when I've done 360s is that something that I can do, which is a bit of a strength, but then is also a weakness, is that I can do high level strategy, but then I can really quickly get into the weeds and I can kind of traverse the two very quickly. I guess I would say that I'm not one of those CMOs that's just like in the clouds on strategy. I'd really like to be able to execute and get in the weeds. And feedback that I've received in the past that like is that skill set is quite unusual / unique, and it can also be quite difficult for your team members if they can't traverse high level and then into the weeds with you. They may need like more context and or more time to kind of get there where you're going. So that's probably a pretty big one. I mean, I think a pretty standard one for me was just like not adjusting my style and just assuming that whatever style worked for me that I liked being managed in worked for everyone on my team. And I think now I've learned just from trial and error that everyone's different. Everyone likes to be managed differently. Some people like to shoot the shit for like 15 minutes in a one-on-one before getting into the meat of it. Whereas other people just want to get straight into, the specifics. And so just kind of letting my team actually lead one-on-ones is really kind of something that I have gotten a lot of benefit out of in the last few years. And I think probably the last thing and the most important thing that I learned over the years was just, I think very early on for me in my career, I over indexed results. And so by results, I mean, focusing on driving impact, driving revenue, driving numbers, at the expense of relationships. And I was really fortunate when I was at HubSpot to get a weekly executive coach who kind of helped me better understand this idea of like, you need to be able to balance relationships and results. Because if you just focus on results, you'll burn relationships and you'll burn bridges that will make it harder to drive those results a long term. So really kind of learning to balance relationships and results has been something that I think, if anything, has been the most pivotal learning and mistake for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I feel like I want to unpack all of these, but let's start with the one that you just said was the most pivotal. That's a really tough one, right? Because
It's a really tough one, yeah.
so maybe we can dig in a bit further. I mean, are you basically saying that, you should prioritize relationships over results, or how do you figure out the fine balance?
No,
And does it?
it's quite even, I think, that you need to focus on both of them. And I think the idea is, I haven't given this as much thought as I would like, but I think the rationale or the way I've kind of understood it is that focusing on results is great in the short term. Yeah. But as a manager, as a leader, you can't do everything. Yeah. You can't be the person to send every email, to write every tweet, to, be on every sales call, to write every sales deck. And if you truly want to grow your ability to scale your team and your business, you need to be able to delegate. And so I think it has a little bit more to do actually underneath it with like delegation and with autonomy. And I think that's the key piece there, right? So if you balance relationships and results, you are at the same time, while driving results, building relationships, teaching your team, giving constructive feedback in a helpful way, such that they then can drive those results for you at the end of the day. And so I think, and again, I'm just thinking this on the fly, but I think for me, that's really like the crux of the importance there. And I think that's just a classic mistake, where whatever you want to call it, I think that's just a classic mistake that many managers make, is that typically, and this is, I guess, a bit of a systemic problem in the way you become a manager, is that typically people that get promoted into managers are high performing individual contributors. Yeah. And so what made you a great high performing individual contributor, IC, is typically not what makes you a good manager, right? So like what made me a great IC was that I was willing to just work all hours, work on the weekends, not because I felt like I had to. I was just obsessed with it, and I loved what I did. And that doesn't translate very well when you're managing people. You can't force them to do that, nor can you do that yourself. So I think that's kind of what's underneath that for me.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So like let's if we were to have an example, so if you, for example, see some copy that's written, you could probably jump in and what, say, your standard of, a copy should be, rather than going in the short term and making it that you want to invest in the relationship and the person, so that over time, like, they can actually do those things on their own, even without your involvement.
100%. Yeah, like that's a good example of, I even remember, and like let me put a big fat disclaimer to say that I don't practice all the things that I'm talking about perfectly. Yeah. And I can even think of a few years ago where sometimes, like, if I wanted to change a headline of a blog post, I would just go into HubSpot and change the blog post's headline. And then that would be like surprising to the content team. B, they would feel like their work wasn't good and that I didn't like it. And then C, like they're not learning from the experience. And so that's such a hard one to get good at or to control, because it is going to be faster to get to the end product in the short term, in that the headline will now be the way you think it should be. But again, you're not teaching people how to do that themselves. And so eventually that system will break. So I think you kind of set that up for me, but that is a really clear example of something that I used to do all the time. And it wasn't until the team sat me down and said, hey, the team gets a little bit like scared when you do that, because they feel like now you think their work isn't good. And can we build a process? And I was like, yes, thanks so much for telling me. I didn't even think of it. I didn't even know they would realize I had changed 2 words, but people do notice those things. So that was a really good learning.
And I mean, getting a little bit tactical here, but so what is a better way to do it? Say you see a headline and like you know exactly what it should be.
Mm.
What is the right thing to do?
Yeah, what I've started to do now, what I try and do now is as I notice things, right? Like, so I'm always consuming, the company that I work for, social media content, their blog content, etc. I just keep an open doc open, essentially. I use a tool called Roam Research, which I love. And I basically, like, if I see a tweet or if I see anything really that I feel like could have been better, I'll keep a link to it. And then later on in the day or in the week, for example, if I'm seeing a trend in something, then I will kind of like package it up and share it with the person who's responsible for that thing. So if I see, this isn't a real example, but just to kind of articulate the point, is like if I see us posting lots of tweets, without images attached or without videos, I might like take them down and then reach out to the team and say, hey, I noticed a few of these tweets like didn't have an image. I think, I know as a team we've tested this and images help with engagement on social. Can you help me like understand why we didn't add them? And there might be a reason. If there is, then great, glad that I didn't kind of like delete them and rewrite them. And maybe they'll say that actually, look, we were running behind, we didn't have visuals. And then if they didn't have visuals or enough kind of creative options, then I realize, well, the problem isn't the person tweeting. The problem is there's a bottleneck in our design function on the team. And so how do I help open that up so that people have more access to the designers? So yeah, it could be like, it depends, I guess, on the kind of size of the thing that I notice, in terms of whether I just note it down and talk about it with the person in a future one-on-one, or if it's like really urgent and it needs to be addressed right now.
Yeah, no, I think that adds a lot of clarity. And the other thing that you said, that one kind of hit home for me because I also consider myself a creative person that has, mile a minute type ideas. And I have also noticed that it's not productive to share all those things, at the same time. I like your method of sleep on it, and if you still feel that it's a great idea the next day.
Yeah,
I
and you
think
know what's
that
the most depressing part of this, Aiden, is that 90% of my amazing ideas absolutely suck the next day. Well, they're just like, I think I'm just an energetic, excited person. So when I have an idea, I trick myself, I think, sometimes into thinking it's better than it is. And then once I sleep on, I'm like, yeah, that's nothing special. And then, so yeah, only 10% of those things will ever maybe make it to my team.
So one question that I have that is kind of related is, marketing is such a creative sport. And a lot of it is about having ideas and unique insights and trying to do things. What do you think about the concept of like idea generation and, how much of it, say, comes from you as a leader and how much of it comes from the team? And just going back to your original example, say like you have an idea and from experience, this is, say a great idea and you slept
Mm.
on it and the next day it's a great idea. But the team kind of, and giving the ability to the team to also generate their own ideas and execute. And even if it's not the best idea, but learning by doing, running things that will end up, say not being as great, but, they can learn from that.
Yeah, such a good question. And it's such a, SaaStock interviewed me for a podcast this morning, funnily enough. And one of the things we were talking about on the SaaStock podcast was just about that, like, how do you drive innovation and creativity and risk taking and ideation in your marketing teams? And the reason where it came from was just this idea that whenever I speak to CMOs, one of the biggest questions that like CMOs will ask me is, how do you get your teams to be so creative? I want my team to come to me with these ideas. Like, I don't want to be the person having to have all the ideas. And it's happened more and more, and it made me sort of reflect on it more recently and think about that a little bit. And I think early on in my career, it was very much like I was the idea generator. which, and I don't say that in like a self like grandizing way, because like that doesn't scale. But yeah, I think early on for me at least, like that was just the way I thought. That's the way my brain operates. It just thinks bigger, better. How do we like blow something out of the water? Um, and it wasn't thanks to doing lots and lots and lots of therapy that I've kind of gotten to the roots of that. And the TLDR is that like I was bullied really badly as a kid. And so I had low self-esteem and have worked on that. And so for me, the way like I got self-esteem, which was an ineffective way, was through, work and through being, getting praise at work. Essentially, it was kind of like how I felt like I was valuable. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that little bit of context, because I'm a big fan of mental health. But I think for me, it really comes down to like starting at the top and showing people how you do it and how you think about it, and then setting up incentives or processes that help them see that that's what you want to see from them. And so, at G2, as the marketing team got bigger, we would do monthly, can't remember what it was called exactly, but it was essentially like a monthly marketing show and tell. I think it was called an innovation meeting or something. And basically every month the different teams in marketing would pitch their most innovative ideas and the things that like they would like to do and the things that they have just done. And the most innovative ones would then get to present to the whole marketing team. And the reason why I set that up was because like I wanted people to be able to see that like, wow, if you drive innovation, if you do innovative things, if you're creative, if you take risks, even if they don't work out, we praise that. Like that's what I want to see. And so by me setting that up and by me praising these things, I wanted to kind of like create a culture ultimately where people could see that, okay, cool. If I want to get noticed by my boss's boss, my boss's boss's boss, this is the way to do it. And that naturally then aligned with my own incentives, because I need the team to be thinking outside the box and doing creative things so that we're not just doing best practices, as I mentioned before, but we're doing more than that. So, I think you have to do it. I think you have to speak to your directors about it regularly and ask them like, what are they excited about that their team is working on? Where is their team innovating? I think part of it is also just as a CMO or as a manager, you need to be a massive consumer of whatever the art or the science is that your team is doing, right? So for example, I'm like avid on social. I subscribe to lots of different emails. Like I'm a massive consumer of content. And whenever I see something that catches my eye, whether it's on email or Netflix or anything, I'll screenshot it and then share it with someone on my team that is responsible for that function at Whereby. And my goal there is to help them kind of see the way I think and help them see the way that I capture ideas just from walking out and about. And by doing so, I'm hoping that they see like, wow, okay, there's so many ideas out there in the wild. If you just kind of like for a nanosecond notice what you are noticing, it's such a meta thing to say, but like if you notice what you are noticing or where your attention is going, you can start to reverse engineer how it caught your attention. So like I hate TikTok for example, but I love going on there to learn how to capture someone's attention really quickly so that I can then pass those learnings along to my team.
Yeah.
But that's I think how I think of it, I guess, ultimately, and just keep like raising the bar.
Yeah, and I like what you said. It seems like, earlier in your career, you started by like the thing that you were, I guess, optimizing for was making sure that you can generate ideas that are good ideas. But then as you grow more senior, you're more excited about, those ideas and the system that continues to generate ideas even while you sleep almost. You don't have to be
Yeah,
involved.
I think that's a good way to think of it. And I think I just thought of this right now, actually, but I think part of it too for me was also, I think earlier on in your career, or at least for me in my career, I was still making a name for myself. Like I was still moving up the ranks and getting promoted. And I think a big part of like what drove me to be innovative and to try and drive results and to obsess over results instead of relationships was that I felt like if that was the only way to get noticed so that I would get promoted. And it worked, which, I'm happy about, but I think it worked at a cost. And it wasn't until I became more senior that I realized wow, I probably could have gotten here in a different way, and in a way that maybe was more productive, perhaps, or more inclusive or more helpful to those around me.
Yeah, it really shifts. It's just going back to what you said earlier, which is going from the short term to a longer term focus. That seems to be a pattern. And something that is somewhat related. I mean, in marketing, you can't help but also talk about inbound marketing. But I don't know if you've coined it, but I really like the phrase inbound recruiting, which also sounds like a longer term, not maybe shorter term kind of
Yeah,
approach.
absolutely.
I'd love for you to, what is inbound recruiting?
Yeah, so I did a talk about this at a summit, gosh, in Singapore. It was like a global HR summit. And it was basically this idea that came from Hubspot, where, old school recruiting. And so I'm firstly, let me say, like, I'm not responsible for the term. But I just, yeah, did a talk on it. And it was this idea that like old school or outbound recruiting is like posting to job boards, right? And the problem with posting only to job boards is you're only getting in front of active candidates. These are people that are actively looking. And the reality is, I can't remember the stat from my presentation. I think if someone searched on Google like Ryan Bonnici HR Summit, they would find it, or inbound recruiting, because I uploaded the talk. But I think it was like 2/3 of people are passive, right? So 2/3 of people are just in their jobs, they're happy, and they're the candidates you really want. Like the people that are happy doing a great job are who you want to attract to your team. And so this idea of inbound recruiting was by creating content that your ideal employee, your ideal team member is looking for, is the best way to attract those passive candidates. So an example would be, if you're trying to if you're trying to hire new managers, for example, or, if you're trying to hire like, yeah, junior managers, you might create content on your company culture blog that's around the topic of how to run a good one-on-one. Yeah, because the only person that's searching for how to run a good one-on-one is a manager. Yeah, so if you need to hire managers really quickly, then create content that they go to Google and they search for. Similarly, if you're trying to hire a marketing operations or a marketing, yeah, or a CMO, you might be creating content around, how to manage a marketing budget, right? Like a marketing budget is something that probably a marketing manager isn't looking for, but a marketing director is. Now, it's a long burn process though, right? But if you do it over time and build it up, similar to inbound marketing, it builds, a sustainable funnel of candidates coming into you. And the thing that I also really love about it is people that are looking for that are people that you want to have on your team because of the fact that they are people that research. There's nothing worse than someone on a team that like they have a question and they post it in Slack when they could have gone to Google and searched it. Like, why interrupt everyone else's day and ask a question that Google can answer for you? And so by creating content that helps pull in candidates that might be looking for jobs, you're attracting candidates that are self-starters by definition, because they have found your content because they were looking for it proactively.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, I mean, it reminds me exactly of like inbound and outbound marketing,
Yeah,
or
it's
like paid
exactly the same.
marketing. You could
Yeah,
go get the clicks on Google and pay for it, but the real moat is in SEO. And it seems like this
totally.
is, yeah, exact same thing.
Absolutely.
So another thing, I mean, just on the topic of recruiting, since we're talking about recruiting, is it true that you actually encourage people on your team to go get outside offers from other companies?
Yeah, so I wrote an article, I think it was in Harvard or it might have been World Economic Forum about this. And it wasn't so much, I think the editor at HBR or wherever it was may have taken some like creative license with like the title of the article that I
They
wrote.
went in and changed the title
I
without
think
telling everyone.
they might have, which is their right given it's their publication and I was just a guest contributor. But it was a little bit clickbaity maybe, but no, the essence is still is accurate. It's more just that like I I encourage my team, if recruiters reach out to them and they're interested in chatting to them, they should chat to them. And I think my philosophy is, that's what I've always done in my career, and it's helped me it's helped me know my worth. Yeah. And so had I have not accepted recruiters as telephone calls or LinkedIn emails, I wouldn't have early on in my career realized that I was, doing the same job as someone else and I was getting significantly underpaid. And it was because I was like 10 years younger than this person. And by realizing that I was delivering the same results as someone that was more senior to me in age, but we were still doing the same job, it helped me get, my first really big promotion, and a really big pay bump. And so I started to kind of, I guess, just value this idea of knowing your worth. Yeah. And, and when I think I wrote about this in that article, but, when I talk to my team about this, like I say to them, the thing you need to be aware of though, is if you do get, a job offer from another company, it's more money, like before you come to the company and say and use it as a bargaining chip, like be ready for the fact that they may not play ball and they may say, cool, you should go and take that, like peace out. And so I think, it's only something that you want to use like if you want to stay at the company that you're at and you want to use this to help the company realize that what they have in you is something that they don't want to lose. Yeah. So like that example that I gave, I said, I've gotten these offers from these other companies, they're paying me this much more, which is the same as what my counterpart is being paid for doing the same job that I'm doing, but I'm getting less because I'm younger. I don't want to leave, but I can't turn down this much money and this much responsibility. And then over the weekend, my VP was able to make things happen and, get me a stock grant and a really quick increase in pay and a promotion. And but that could have gone a different way, right? They could have said, hey, look, I think it's a great offer, you should take it. Like, and if I didn't take it, then I don't know how successful I would have been at that company had I stayed. So yeah, I definitely do encourage my team to do that, just so that they can know really what they're worth on the market. And also, I think it's just important for them to know, like, is there a job that they may learn more in or be happier in? Because they may meet a company and a team that they interview with that they feel like, wow, like I'm going to learn a lot, I'm going to be able to give a lot, this is right for me. And if so, like, I want them to be as happy as they can be, and I want them to be as challenged as they can be. And and vice versa, if they came back and said, hey, I love working with you, I love the company that I'm currently at with you, but this other company is offering me a broader role, like how would if I were to stay, how could I get a broader role at your company, at the company I'm currently at? And then I would work with them on what that would look like, what they would need to do to get there. So I think it just creates a really good dialogue with your employees where they know that you genuinely care about them and their development.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point around obviously like really caring about the employee, their development. They can understand like what broader responsibilities there may be, and ultimately, I think at the end of the day, if people are happy and they're looking to grow, it's always useful to know what else exists, so you can also be ambitious to do those things even where you're at. So I think the general awareness is something that just makes sense for
It
people to have.
also it enforces a feedback conversation, right? So let's say the person comes to you and they say what I just said. You could tell them, hey, I love working with you, but the truth is, and hopefully this wouldn't be the case for me because I give a lot of feedback often, I hope. But if a lot of managers don't, right, it's like a common thing that you hear from employees. And I think you could use that opportunity to help raise that person's levels of awareness to their own skills and their own areas for development, right? So if they came to you and they said that, you could say, hey, we would love to hold on to you, but the reality is, while you may get more money there, we think what you could get at this company is still also really good. And these are some areas that if you were to get that here, you would need to work on. And so if they do really want to stay there, then at least it forces you to have that conversation where you're having to now tell them why you wouldn't promote them to the level or pay them the pay that they want. And again, I don't think that should be the only time you give feedback, right? That's like definitely not what I'm promoting here, but it just forces that transparent conversation with your team.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. At the end of the day, investing in your team's growth in all the different ways, including like career growth, makes a lot of sense. And One thing that I really wanted to make sure that we had time to speak about, given what Whereby does, given that you have been a remote company for a long time, even before the pandemic, I think, um, would love to know like some of the learnings that you've had maybe with your team on some best practices, especially as it relates to meetings or just some of the practices that you've had that has really made remote work work well for you.
Yeah, this is definitely my first job where it's been entirely remote from the start. I've never met any of my colleagues, except for a few people that I've more recently hired to my team who I had worked with at previous companies. And I think there's a few. I mean, and this is part of actually why I joined Whereby in the first place was that, last year during the pandemic at G2, we were using Zoom and I'd used Zoom for probably 5 years at least. And had never had any issues with it, but I just never enjoyed using Zoom. I always found it clunky and just not easy to use and not user intuitive. And part of what I loved about Whereby was just the simplicity of it and the design and the UX. And it's just a very thoughtful product that kind of works out what you're trying to use it for and adjusts automatically. And so I think, I can't take credit for this, but one thing that the Whereby team does is in terms of how they use Whereby well, is that when we're doing like all hands and big company meetings, we're super active with regard to using reactions and emojis. And I don't think no other video tool that I've seen does them the way we do them at Whereby. So when you're in like a big meeting or even a small meeting, whoever is on video and unmuted kind of goes to this virtual stage. And then if you're muted, you become kind of like a smaller box on the side or on the bottom if it's a bigger meeting. And so when you're doing a team meeting or an all hands or you're presenting and people respond live with emojis, and I don't just mean like one here or there, I mean like you will just see these emojis flying in, and you see where it came from. So the person that did it, or if they chat, it doesn't just go into kind of like a boring long chat, like their chat bubble shoots across the screen for everyone to see. And it's weird, it's such a small thing, but it makes your meeting so much more inclusive and gives everyone in the meeting a voice to be able to respond. And so instead of, I think whenever I'm on a Zoom meeting, I never ever see anyone use the reactions other than maybe one here or there. Whereas at Whereby, I think it's just because of the design of the product more so than anything, where we really kind of like use reactions and use emojis to kind of thumbs up things to celebrate wins, etc. when someone's talking. And as a speaker as well, it's nice because you're seeing all of these emojis shoot across the screen based on what you're saying. So it gives you live feedback. So that's one of the things that I've found really useful. And weirdly, I find that when I'm in long meetings on Whereby, I don't feel as fatigued. And we hear this from our customers. And if you go to, G2, where I previously worked, Whereby is rated the easiest to use video tool, much more highly than Zoom even. And people talk about this like Zoom fatigue and how they don't feel it on Whereby because of the unique design. We also promote audio only calls quite a bit at Whereby. So we'll do a lot of calls through just the, Safari on our phones and just walk around with them. So we're pretty heavy on audio too, just because I don't think it's natural to stare at your face and into someone else's face for so long all the time with like undivided eye contact. So we're pretty good about audio only calls, but I think they're just a few of the things. But I think, look, the biggest thing that I've learned in the last year more than anything is that meeting software, video conferencing tools aren't the problem. The problem is the way we manage our calendar as managers, as employees. And, whether you're doing lots of meetings in an office or at home, they're exhausting nonetheless. Like the reason they're exhausting is because you're not building in enough breaks for yourself, enough buffer time to actually follow up on the action items from the past meeting, which obviously Fellow does a great job at solving for. But then also it's about like kind of pushing back on meetings that aren't necessarily necessary. So if I get added to a meeting that doesn't have an agenda, 8 out of 10 times I'll respond back to the person saying, hey, can I get an agenda for this meeting so that I can prepare? And that again signals to my team that like you should prepare before you join a meeting. And if you don't need to prepare for a meeting, do you really need to be there, or should it really be a meeting? It probably shouldn't. It should probably be a Slack message or an email. So I think just kind of being really kind of particular about how many meetings you do, blocking out time in your calendar, doing audio only calls, making sure that all meetings have an agenda where needed, are some of the things that we sort of just practice at Whereby, given, we've been an entirely distributed and remote team from the start.
Yeah, I think those are some really good tips. And what I like about the reactions in particular is it just makes it a more engaging experience, right? And like you said, in terms of like being inclusive, you could argue that, actually not being in person and doing something remote through, basically a tool like Whereby is actually potentially even better because it allows more people to actually have a voice during the meeting, which again is harder to do if you don't have the tools that allow you to do it. So I think, yeah, lots of really good tips there. I know we're coming up on time, Ryan. So one question that I wanted to kind of finish off on, and it's a question that we ask all of our guests, is for all the managers and leaders out there constantly looking to get better at their craft, what tips, tricks, resources, or final words of wisdom would you want to leave them with?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I think it's like a never-ending journey, management and people management specifically, and leadership. I think for me, and then just using my own example and experience, I think where I've made the biggest progress or the biggest strides as a manager and maybe as a human have been from two things. It's really been from executive coaching, which is obviously expensive and not everyone can afford, or most companies won't pay for. So I don't think that's as necessary. I think the second one, and maybe the more important one, not just for work, but for life, is therapy, really. Because I think so much of what makes you a good manager is knowing your patterns and knowing when you're seeing something in someone else that's activating you, or not activating you even. And so by just doing a lot of therapy over the years, I think that more than anything actually has probably helped me be a better manager and learn, because I've learned about myself. I've learned about what I like, what I don't like, what bothers me, what doesn't bother me. And so that's just kind of like raised my levels of awareness to just being crazily conscious when I am meeting with people and when I am managing my team. And I think the executive coaching more so helped me get like a language and a labeling way to speak about the stuff that I had learned in therapy, or frameworks to kind of wrap what I was learning in a simpler way of thinking. So I think I would say, yeah, executive coaching, and even just reading about it, right? Like you don't need to have an executive coach, right? Like what's his name? Bill Campbell, who coached Google's leadership team and many leadership teams, right? Like his book, I think it's Billion Dollar Coach, I read years ago and absolutely like devoured that. Like so many good learnings in there. So I think just, reading about other folks that are learning, listening to podcasts like this. And I would say even just documenting your own experiences, right? In the same way that you've mentioned a few articles that I've written, you don't need to publish them on HBR necessarily, just publish them on LinkedIn, even on Medium, and just share your own experiences. Because I think the act of kind of encoding and then coding up what you've learned, what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, and then documenting and editing that helps you actually refine your own views on things so that you will then do a better job at it in the future.
Yeah, I think that's great advice and a great place to end it. Ryan, thanks so much for doing this.
Aidan, thanks so much for having me.